It didn't start with strength. It started with silence. You remember it vaguely, like a dream that keeps replaying in softer colors. A room too quiet. A voice calling your name that never came. The small moment when you realized no one was coming to help. So you stopped asking. At first, it wasn't rebellion. It was instinct. You folded your needs into corners no one could reach. You learned to smile before the tears could show. You learned to say it's okay before anyone had a chance to ask what was wrong. They said you were mature for your age. They said you were easy to raise. And you believed them, because praise is still love, even when it comes at the cost of your softness. But deep down, something ached, a small voice whispering, "This isn't how love should feel." You began to read silence like a language. Every pause in a parent's tone, every sigh before an answer. You learned when to stay quiet, when to disappear. You thought it was wisdom, but it was fear wearing a grown-up's face. There were nights you wanted to cry, but the tears felt heavy, like they belonged to someone weaker. So you swallowed them whole. You pretended you were strong. You promised yourself you'd never need too much, never take up too much space. You watched other children fall apart and get held. You watched yourself stay composed and get praised. And something inside you split between the one who wanted comfort and the one who decided they'd never ask again. That's how it began. The quiet contract between pain and control. The first fracture beneath the calm. And from that day on, every time someone forgot you, dismissed you, or called you strong, the crack deepened, invisible, but growing. You built yourself on top of it. You called it resilience. You wore it like pride. But if you listened closely, beneath all that composure, you could still hear it. The faint sound of something breaking. But strength, when built from fear, begins to whisper in strange ways. You learned to smile through the ache and call it strength. It became easy, didn't it? To dress your wounds in composure, to talk about chaos like it was a story that happened to someone else. You became fluent in calm. You built routines out of control. And the world, oh, the world adored you for it. They said you were reliable, steady, the one who never falls apart. But they never asked what it cost to be that person. They never saw the sleepless nights, the endless mental rehearsals, the quiet terror of meeting someone and having no one to meet. "I'm fine," you said, again and again, until the words stopped meaning anything. They became your armor, their reflex, your cage. You said them when you were breaking, when you were tired, when the room spun from holding too much. You said them even when someone cared enough to ask twice. You started mistaking distance for dignity. You believed that holding everything together made you worthy of love. But inside, something fragile began to erode. The soft parts of you that once believed in comfort, in being understood, in being seen. There were moments you almost let someone in, almost. But then came the fear of being too much, of leaning too hard, of becoming a burden. So you smiled instead, changed the subject, and built another wall. You told yourself that people were unpredictable, that self-reliance was safer, that meeting nothing meant losing nothing. But what you didn't see was how loneliness slipped in quietly, through the cracks you refused to acknowledge. The silence started to echo. The laughter felt rehearsed. Every "unokay" left a faint bitterness on your tongue. You began to envy the ones who cried freely, the ones who asked for help without shame. You called it weakness once, but now it looked like freedom. There were nights when your chest felt too tight, and you caught yourself wishing someone would notice. But you pushed the thought away. You had a role to play, the strong one, the unshaken one, the one who holds everyone else. And so you performed, day after day, until performance became personality, until you couldn't tell where the mask ended and you began. Sometimes, in the mirror, you almost saw it, the exhaustion behind your eyes, but you blinked it away. You weren't ready to face it. Not yet. Because once you admit that the mask is heavy, you have to feel the face beneath it. But every mask has weight, and yours is starting to tremble. They called you dependable, but they never saw the trembling behind your calm. You wore it well, the mask, the one made of composure, of soft nods and steady tones. You knew exactly when to speak, when to listen, when to smile. You were the quiet in other people's storms, the anchor they clung to when their own world spun too fast. And for a while, it worked. You built a fortress out of reliability. Every brick, a promise kept, a need swallowed, a moment of pain disguised as patience. People came to you for strength, for guidance, for comfort. They poured their sorrows into your steady hands. You listened, you soothed, but no one ever asked what it did to you. Because the strong ones don't need saving, right? That's what they say. And so, when the nights grew heavy, when the silence pressed against your ribs, you told yourself it was fine. You'd chosen this. You'd become this. You didn't need anyone. But deep inside, there was a flicker, small, restless, that longed to be held without earning it, to be understood without translating the ache into calm words, to be seen without having to fall apart first. You started noticing the cracks, how your smile didn't quite reach your eyes, how the laughter caught in your throat. You could feel the weight of your own stillness, the way it pinned you to the image others needed from you. They admired your stability, but none of them realized it wasn't peace, it was performance. You became fluent in other people's pain, fluent in your own suppression. When you felt your chest tighten, you turned it into advice. When your voice trembled, you lowered it to sound reassuring. You became the caretaker of everyone's emotions except your own. There were moments, fleeting, almost invisible, when someone would look at you a little too closely. When you'd feel seen, exposed, and something inside you panicked. You'd laugh it off, change the subject, pull the mask tighter. Because what if they saw the exhaustion underneath, the fear, the loneliness? You told yourself you didn't want to be a burden, but the truth was simpler. You didn't know how to be cared for anymore. Every time someone reached out, it felt foreign, dangerous, like stepping into warmth you didn't trust. And so, you kept performing, day after day, a masterpiece of control, a saint of stability, a ghost inside your own skin. But the mirror never lies for long. You began to catch glimpses in reflections, in dreams, in the spaces between conversations. A stranger wearing your face, eyes tired, smile fragile, whispering, "Is this still you?" You'd look away, pretending you hadn't heard, pretending the reflection wasn't cracking, that your calm wasn't slipping. But masks grow heavy when worn too long. And one night, under the soft hum of your own silence, the mirror finally stopped protecting you. You looked at yourself, and for the first time, you didn't believe your own calm. It was late, the kind of quiet that makes the walls breathe. You stood in front of the mirror, just like every other night, but something was different this time. Maybe it was the way your reflection didn't quite look back, just stared, waiting. The face you saw was familiar, yet distant. The smile, still there, faint and polite, but the eyes, they looked older, not from time, but from holding too much. You tried to adjust, to fix your posture, to smooth the mask, but it didn't fit anymore. The calm you'd worn for years suddenly looked like a costume, 2 sizes too small. You realized how tired you were, not just physically, but deep in the kind of way that no amount of sleep could fix, the kind of tired that comes from being everything to everyone and nothing to yourself. You watched the person in the mirror, the one who had survived every storm without ever calling for help, the one who smiled through heartbreak, who became the dependable one, the unshakable one, the strong one. And for a moment, you didn't know whether to admire them or mourn them. You reached for the sink, steadying yourself, but your hands trembled. The truth was beginning to rise, slow, heavy, impossible to swallow. You saw the loneliness that had been living inside you all this time, wearing disguises, hiding behind purpose and pride. You whispered to the reflection, "I'm so tired." And it echoed, not in sound, but in feeling, a deep, unspoken grief. It wasn't weakness you saw now. It was the child you left behind, the one who learned silence before safety, composure before comfort. You saw them clearly, standing just behind the adult you became, eyes wide, hands small, still waiting to be held. Shame came first, that old familiar ache that told you to hide again, to wipe the tears before they could fall. But something inside you refused. Maybe because you were finally too exhausted to pretend. Maybe because the mirror, for once, didn't let you look away. Tears came quietly, hesitant, like they were asking permission. You hadn't cried like that in years. The sound was foreign, yet after a strange fight, played something like the face of the toil with a hand. You saw it then, the truth that had always been there. Strength was never your nature, it was your defense. You didn't grow strong because you were fearless. You grew strong because you were afraid, and no one noticed. That realization broke something in you, but it also softened you. The reflection didn't look proud anymore. It looked human, messy, real. You touched your face, not to fix, but to feel. The warmth of your own skin startled you. It had been so long since you treated yourself gently. You thought about all the years spent holding others, never realizing you'd been craving the same embrace. You whispered, "I miss me." And for the first time, you meant it. There was no dramatic breakdown, no shattering sound, just stillness, the kind that comes after a long storm. You breathed, slowly, deeply, each breath feeling like a small act of rebellion against the person you pretended to be. The mirror didn't offer comfort, but it offered truth. It showed you everything you had buried, and somehow, you didn't hate it. You almost pitied the version of you who believed love had to be earned, who thought meeting help made you weak. You stared a little longer, studying the small details, the faint lines from sleepless nights, the way your jaw always tensed when someone asked if you were okay. These weren't flaws. They were evidence, proof of how much you endured just to keep standing. And standing there, you made no promises to change, no vows to heal overnight. You simply allowed yourself to be seen by the one person who had been missing all along. The reflection blinked. So did you. And in that tiny synchronization, something aligned again. Not perfectly, but honestly. You didn't feel powerful. You didn't feel broken. You just felt real. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The breaking point is already near. It doesn't explode. It just fades. The strength, the smile, the pretending. You sat there, in the dark, and for the first time, nothing held. Not pride, not control, not the careful mask you'd worn so long it had become part of your skin. The walls you built around yourself, they weren't protecting you anymore. They were pressing down, heavy, unyielding. Breath came in shallow bursts. You didn't scream. You didn't move. You just let the emptiness settle, like a fog filling every corner of your chest. All the rehearsed unfinds, scattered like ashes on the floor. All the smiles that hid trembling teeth and quiet despair, gone. It wasn't anger. It was exhaustion. A quiet, aching void that whispered truths you'd ignored for years. You realized something you'd always feared. Independence without connection is isolation. Strength without surrender is hollow. And you had been hollow for so long. You felt the first tear slip, warm, insistent. One became two, then many, until you couldn't count them. They were not loud, not dramatic. They were just there, a slow release of years spent holding everything in. You let them fall without shame, without apology. Your hands trembled. You hugged your knees, rocking slightly, whispering fragments of confession to the empty room. I'm tired. I can't do it alone. I just want to rest. Words you'd never allowed yourself to speak aloud before. Words that sounded strange, even to your own ears. The mask cracked further. You noticed the silence of your own heartbeat, steady, yet trembling. You felt the weight of all the things you never asked for. The care, the tenderness, the softness. They had always seemed dangerous, impossible, undeserved. But now, they felt necessary. Memories came unbidden. Moments when someone might have held you, but you pushed them away. Moments you chose composure over comfort. Moments you told yourself weakness was failure. And now, weakness didn't look like failure. It looked like humanity. You exhaled sharply. You let yourself sink further into the floor, into the dark, into the truth of how much you had carried. Not with resentment, not yet, but with recognition. The recognition that you were human, that you had needs, that needing help didn't make you less. The quiet around you thickened. Even the air felt heavy, intimate. You could hear your own breath, slow and uneven. You realized how much of yourself you had given to others and how little you had returned. You felt the ache of years spent strong for everyone else. You whispered, I'm allowed to fall. I'm allowed to need. And with it came a strange lightness, a first tremor of relief. Your body sagged, your mind stilled. You no longer reached for the mask. You no longer pretended. For the first time in forever, you simply existed. Not as strong, not as unbreakable, not as dependable. Just you. The room remained dark. The tears dried. But inside, something shifted, small and quiet, like a tide pulling back to reveal the shore. And beneath that silence lies the truth they've buried all along. You weren't strong because you wanted to be. You were strong because no one stayed long enough to help you fall apart. Think back, way back, to the small you, waiting for someone to notice, to reach, to say, I'm here. But no one came. Not really. You learned quickly that asking too much meant disappointment, that needing love meant silence, or worse, subtle rejection. You learned to stay. You learned to survive. You forgot to rest. Each choice you made afterward was stitched from that memory, a quiet vow to never be too vulnerable, to never let anyone see the small cracks that could swallow you whole. You hid behind independence because dependence felt dangerous, because needing help had always felt like a trap. The world praised you for it, and you believed it meant you were strong. But strength, as you learned too early, was not freedom. It was armor. It was survival. You remember the dinners where you smiled and laughed, while inside, your chest pressed against the invisible walls you built. You remember the nights lying awake, pretending your heart was quiet, pretending the ache wasn't there. You remember thinking, if I show them, they'll leave. And somehow, they always did. You see it now, don't you? The pattern threading through your life. Every friendship held at arm's length. Every partner met with caution. Every moment of intimacy interrupted by a reflexive wall. It wasn't because you didn't care. It was because you had learned to fear care itself. And yet, even with all the walls, the patterns, the rehearsed smiles, the little you never vanished. That small, quiet version of you, the one who still hoped, still longed to be seen, still whispers, still waits, still believes, even when your adult self doubts. You weren't weak for hiding. You weren't selfish for protecting yourself. You were human, and in that humanity, you can find compassion. You can reach toward that inner child, kneel down in the memory, and say, I see you. You are not too much. You are not a burden. You are enough. You see the echoes of the past in your adult life. Every cautious choice, every carefully measured word, every act of self-sufficiency. And with recognition comes tenderness. You can forgive yourself for surviving by any means necessary. You can honor the ways you held yourself together when no one else could. You notice how often you underestimated your own pain, how you dismissed the longing for comfort as weakness, how the mask became more familiar than your own face, cause. But it's all there now, the truth you buried under effort, under smiles, under resilience. You let it rise, you let it settle, you allow the grief to mingle with compassion. You see your childhood reflected in your choices, and you realize it is not condemnation, it is clarity. You can finally say to yourself, I was never too much. I was never too weak. I was learning to survive, and now I can begin to heal. The truth does not scream, it whispers, and in that whisper, you finally hear the echo of self-forgiveness. But awareness doesn't heal alone, it ripples. Real strength was never in the walls, it was in the door you finally opened. You felt it first as a whisper, a hesitation, a small, almost imperceptible willingness to let someone in, to let them notice when you are tired, when your shoulders sagged, when the words I'm fine trembled on your lips before you said them. You didn't need to shout. You didn't need grand gestures, just a nod, a hand held, a presence that said, I see you. And for the first time in a long time, you let it matter. You remembered the times you had always carried others, shielding them from hurt, offering strength you didn't feel. And now, you allowed yourself to lean, not weakly, not desperately, but quietly, deliberately. Softly, slowly, your voice softened too. Words didn't have to armor themselves anymore. They floated, honest and simple. I'm tired today. I need a moment. I can't do it alone. And with each admission, the weight lifted slightly, the fortress walls retreating just enough to let air in. You felt tenderness return, not as a foreign thing, but as a natural rhythm you had forgotten. A warmth spreading from your chest, small sparks of comfort igniting where fear once lived. You realized strength was not resistance. It was openness. It was courage to be seen without control. Every small door you opened whispered hope. Every hand you accepted told a quiet truth. You were not too much. You were not unworthy. You were allowed to rest, allowed to receive, allowed to be fragile and whole at once. And the more you let in, the lighter your steps became. The more you allowed, the more space you found inside yourself to breathe, to smile, to remember who you were beneath the mask. You didn't need to rebuild overnight. You simply needed to open another door and another. And each one felt easier, gentler, safer. And through that door, the self you lost was waiting. You were never too strong, just too alone, for too long. You walk differently now. Not rigid, not performing, not holding yourself against the world. You move with the ease of someone who has finally allowed themselves to exist as they are. Strength no longer demands armor. It breathes, it softens, it bends without breaking. You carry your independence like a quiet companion, not a shield. You meet the day with calm resolve, knowing you are enough, whole, and seen. You remember the walls you built, the masks you wore, the silences you carried, and you nod to them gently, acknowledging their purpose, but leaving them behind. You are not defined by fear anymore. You let tenderness in without hesitation. You let care in without shame. You rest without guilt. And in this balance, you find peace. Strength and softness are no longer opposites. They are threads of the same fabric, woven together quietly, invisibly, perfectly. You smile softly at your reflection. No performance, no mask, just truth, just presence. And now, finally, you're home.